Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. My name is Anherad Lang. I'm the Executive Director of PHAP, that's short for the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection. It is my great pleasure to be welcoming you all as your host for this online session today on the Child Protection Minimum Standards. Today we will receive an introduction to the standards, understand better how they are used in practice, and it will also be an opportunity to learn more about the current revision process now underway. So now moving into the substance of today's session regarding the Child Protection Minimum Standards and their revision. Since they were launched 6 years ago, the Child Protection Minimum Standards, known as the CPMs, have become an important reference to help ensure that measures to protect children are a central component of all humanitarian action. The CPMs are currently being revised and updated, and many of you have already been involved in that process, building on evidence, practice, and experience gathered since the first edition came out in 2012. This 18-month revision process offers many opportunities for users across the world to participate. In order to reach a wider set of practitioners across the sector, PHAP is supporting these consultations through an online-based process, both through a survey targeting some of the specific issues that have come up during the revision process, and through managing comments coming in about the current draft revised text. Also, as a part of PHAP's support to the revision process of the CPMS, we're organizing today's live event, live discussion, to help practitioners become even better acquainted with these standards, how they're being used in practice, and how you can contribute to the current consultations. We'll hear today from the two co-chairs of the CPMS working group, as well as the director of SPHERE, and 4 practitioners who will share their experiences of working with the standards in practice. We're happy to have with us, and I'd like to welcome now to the event the co-chairs of the CPMS working group, Minja Poischel and Suza Wisniewski, who will provide an introduction to the CPMS and the CPMS revision process. I'd also like to welcome Christine Knudsen, Director of SPHERE, who is joining me from the PHAP office today and will provide some insights into how the CPMS relates to the SPHERE standards, which I know all of you must be familiar with, and their current revision process. We will also have with us 4 child protection practitioners on the line. Possibly 3. We have 1 connection we're still working on, so that's a bit TBD. But we're hoping to have all 4 of the following practitioners with us to discuss a bit how they have used the CPMS and how they are engaging in the consultations. These are Patricia Landines, Child Protection Specialist with UNICEF in Mexico, Efe Listowell, Program Officer with the Center for Community Health and Development International, called CHAD International, based in Nigeria, Jessica Serrano with CID in Colombia, and Riyad Al-Najem with HURAS in Syria, however, connecting today from Sweden. So first of all, it's my pleasure to give the floor over to Minja Poischel, who's coming from a human rights background and has worked for UNHCR, for IOM, as well as UNICEF in conflict contexts, including Kosovo and Darfur. For the last 10 years, Minja has been based in Stockholm as a Senior Child Protection in Emergencies Advisor for Save the Children and has co-led the CPMS work since 2010. Minja, thanks so much for joining the discussion today, and you have the floor. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and very nice talking to all of you. So as I said, my name is Minja, and I've been co-leading this work since the beginning, actually, when we first started developing the Child Protection Minimum Standards. And I know I have very short time, so sorry if I will talk a little bit quickly, but I'll try to keep as concise. The Child Protection Minimum Standards were developed in the Child Protection Working Group, and they were aiming at framing our sector at that point, as well as ensuring also accountability and quality in our sector. So this was the first time we came together as a global sector, really trying to to have a common, we first signed off on a common definition and then developed a common minimum standards to see if we agreed on what was actually our responsibility as a child protection sector. Let's see. So, as I said, the aim was to improve accountability, quality, to have common principles, but also to provide a synthesis of good practice. So, of course, we always have had the intention of being evidence-based, but evidence-based is not only academia. So it was also about getting all the information from a huge number of countries and practitioners and agencies who together said, this is actually a practice that works. And that was also what became part of the standards. As well, of course, we always struggle, and we still do, I think, in explaining actually what it is that we are doing as a sector. So it was also to ensure better communication, to give us tools for advocacy and communication, and also fundraising. Now, when they were developed, we always had from the start the ambition to become a companion standard to Sphere. And they also sort of developed in the aftermath of the last Sphere revision. And I know Christine will talk about the current one a bit later. And we became the fourth companion standard to Sphere. So after the minimum economic recovery standard, the livestock in emergencies, and INE, which is on education. And after that, together, the five of us, together with Sphere, started developing something that we call the Humanitarian Standards Partnership. And after that, also the minimum standards for market analysis joined. And now, very recently, we also have the Humanitarian Standards for age and disability, or older people and people with disabilities. And also, I should mention, actually, in terms of the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, one of the joint actions we've done is that we have developed a joint app, which you can all download, where you have all the standards are uploaded there, and they work. If you've downloaded them once, you can also use them offline. So the structure of the child protection minimum standards is shared. Basically, all the humanitarian standards have more or less the same structure. So you have background information, you have the standard itself, and then you have the key actions that sort of guide how you reach that standard. And then you have guidance notes to further inform how you do your key actions. And not the least, you have the indicators. So what we had already in this, our first edition, was both outcome and output indicators, which have changed a little bit for the next revision, which Susan will talk about next. So the principles that we have, not only standards, we have principles. So we have 4 principles that come directly from the Child Rights Convention, which I think most of you are well familiar with. So they're on the survival development, non-discrimination, child participation, and best interest of the child. We also have adapted the 4 protection principles from Sphere, which we will now readapt with the new edition of Sphere. And then we also developed 2 specific principles for the child protection minimum standards, which was on strengthening child protection systems and children's resilience in humanitarian action. And the structure of the child protection minimum standards is that the second pillar is what I talked about, is sort of framing our sector. So when these risks and needs happen to children, we as a sector have an obligation to react and respond, and also to prevent. So the first one is actually the one that will, in the future, will be informed, for instance, by the core humanitarian standard. They are more organizational ones, the ones that ensure that we do things in a qualitative way. The third one, Susan will talk about, that will change a bit for the next one, but that is sort of strategies, ways that we sort of respond to the second pillar. And the fourth one, we are very, very proud that they actually happened, and they have been a great success and will continue. So those are the standards where we work together with other sectors, because while we know that child protection has to be a sector in its own right, it is also something that other sectors have to consider as well and respond to. So the child protection minimum standards have been used in more than 49 countries and 8 regions around the world, and they have been used in an estimate around 72,000 humanitarians. And also when we do a survey, like we have done, for instance, with the child protection coordinators in the child protection area of responsibility, they all say that all of the coordination groups base their work plans on the child protection minimum standards.
and also all the alliance and all the members that we have in the Child Protection Minimum Standards Working Group. When they fill out a survey, they say that they have all integrated the CPMS into their global strategy. So that's, of course, fantastic results 6 years later. But yes, so we are 6 years later, and it means that a lot of things have happened. So again, Susan will talk more about that, but there have been, for instance, external events like the World Humanitarian Summit with the Grand Bargain. It's also the core humanitarian standards has developed. There was internal changes, as for instance that the group where the CPMS were housed has moved out of the cluster system. But there are also things that happened during this time that made us be aware that we have to adapt or refine or develop some of the standards further. So for instance, the Ebola response made it clear to us that the CPMS were not fit for those kind of contagious settings. And I think I'll leave it with that. And sorry for the disconnection.
No problem at all, and thank you so much, Minja, for the presentation. It's a great way to get started with the events, and very informative. I know there were many people on the call who really benefited from that background, so thank you so much. We're going to move now to invite Christine Knudsen onto the line. Pleased to have her with us as well, the Director of SPHERE. As you all know, the CPMS are a companion to the SPHERE Handbook and part of the Humanitarian Standards Partnership. We have actually, before this event, received several questions regarding how the CPMS relates to other programming areas. For example, a question from Sworo Duku in South Sudan, who asks, how will the child protection minimum standards be integrated into other sectors such as WASH, NFI, shelter, FSL, nutrition, etc. To help clarify this question, very pleased to have Christine Knudsen, Director of SPHERE, with us today, who will briefly speak on how the standards relate. So, Christine, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, and a great pleasure to be with all of you today. I think it's a great question that our colleague in South Sudan has asked, and one that we've asked ourselves, of course, when we were designing the revision process. Very happy to say that last year was an extremely busy year of mobilization within the humanitarian community to provide content, to provide experience, to provide evidence learning and knowledge from participants around the world as we went through the revision process. And we're looking forward very much to launching the 4th edition, the 20th anniversary edition of the SPHERE Handbook later this year. So when we were looking at putting the process together, it was important to us to make sure that we had not only qualified and competent and strong leadership in our technical sectors, so of course, as you mentioned already, WASH, shelter, food security, nutrition, and health, but also that we had very good cross-cutting technical experts, and Susan was very kind to join us as an expert not only on child-focused responses, but also on issues of child protection. And I wanted to just highlight that those two areas for us are somewhat different in terms of making sure we have a good lens on it. So, for instance, when we think about health and access to health care, thinking about how children access health care and children's specific health care needs, of course, that is quite an important aspect, and we have maintained a strong focus on children's health in the health chapter. And then if we think about the construction of shelters, we've had good comments about both thinking in terms of recreational space and educational space and safe spaces for children when we think about settlement planning, but also what's happening with children within a domicile, what's happening within the shelter itself, and is there adequate space for privacy within the family? Is there adequate space for girls and boys? And so there were many different aspects we brought into that. The protection principles remain as well in the handbook, and there we've had very good inputs and connections with many of you, I'm sure, and with the CPMS team on looking at child protection in particular, bringing in examples so that every practitioner is aware of what needs to be done on protection globally and protection specifically with a child-focused lens. CPMS is referenced throughout SPHERE, and children's specific needs, vulnerabilities, capacities are also referenced in all of our technical chapters, in the core humanitarian standard, in our protection principles, and in thinking about how to use the SEER standards in context with a very diverse population. So I hope that you will, when you see the fourth edition in a few months' time, I hope that you will see that it has been well brought in, along with other issues like older people, people with disabilities, people living with HIV, and the like, that we are trying to be very inclusive and focus on non-discrimination as well as assertive protection for those with specific vulnerabilities and requirements. So maybe I'll just leave it with that, and very happy to answer any specific questions that may come up. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Christine. I see already some questions coming in, but as mentioned, we'll see to what extent we can get to those during the event today. Otherwise, if you're willing, Christine, we'll follow up with you afterwards and see about sending out some brief responses in the event follow-up. Thanks so much for joining us today. Very helpful to have you here. We're now going to hear from 4 practitioners who are currently active in 4 different humanitarian response contexts who have been using the CPMS in their daily work. First out, Riyad Al-Najem is a human rights activist and works mainly in the area of child protection. He is co-founder and the executive director of Haras Network, a Syrian child protection network. And Riyad is going to be speaking about how the CPMS has been useful in his organization. Riyad, do we have you on the line?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. Excellent. The floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So, as you know now, our organization comes from Syria, and coming from a country that has no knowledge about child protection made it so hard for us to start operating in this field. The law in Syria does not criminalize child rights violations like child physical punishment, child recruitment, early marriage, and lots of other violations. The community also did not have any understanding of the concept of child protection, and starting emphasizing the concept without reference or guidelines made it almost impossible. When the CPMs were published in 2012, it gave us a clear idea where to start and how to build our strategy around the way to approach the community and what to address when designing protection messages. The standards also helped us improve our programming and intervention models. And being also a kind of a new NGO, the standards helped us in designing child-friendly policies and procedures, and merging also child protection quality assurance processes within our workflows. But the huge benefit we had out of CPMS is the mainstreaming of protection into other sectors. Being a part of the organizations that are responding to the Syrian crisis and being specialized in child protection, we could identify the main children's rights violations within the process of implementation in other sectors. And using CPMS, we could provide consultation to many organizations and design organization-based capacity building programs to set child protection and child safeguarding systems. And regarding the upcoming consultation on the revision of CPMS, we are eager to see how the frontline CD staff, caregivers, and children feel about the experience of CPMS during the last 6 years in Syria, and what they wish to add or change. And based on their feedback, we will get a clear idea on what to focus on and what to update or change from the beneficiary's point of view, and that would be an important asset to understand how CPMS helps strengthening the child protection in communities that are new to the concept. That was all for me. Thank you so much, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Very interesting to hear your experience, Riyad, and we'll certainly be coming back to you with some questions either a bit later or in the follow-up. We will now turn to Patricia Landines, who will provide an example of how she has been using the CPMS for child protection training in Mexico and Ecuador. Patricia Landines is a national of Colombia, a psychologist and trained art therapist. Patricia is a practitioner in the field of mental health and psychosocial support during conflict, post-conflict, and in the aftermath of natural disasters. She is currently working as a child protection and emergency specialist with UNICEF Mexico. Due to the time zone difference, Patricia was unable to join us live today. However, she has provided a recording and will certainly be participating in the post-event follow-up for any questions. So now we'll turn to Patricia's recording.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Landines, and I work for UNICEF as Child Protection and Emergencies Specialist, first in Haiti, then Nepal, last year in Ecuador, and now in Mexico. I'm here with you today to very briefly respond to the question, how did I use the standards and were they useful? So, together, the core commitments for children in emergencies of UNICEF and the CPMs are the documents I have always used in my assignment as a child protection and emergency specialist. Today, I would like to highlight how I have used the face-to-face training package in Mexico and Ecuador recently. First, I would like to say that before the earthquake in Ecuador and in Mexico, there was very limited knowledge about child protection and emergencies in general, and CPMS among United Nations staff, civil society organization, and government institution, and in particular in those provinces that were highly affected by the earthquakes. Both in Ecuador and in Mexico, we have used and adapted the CPMS training package to facilitate a series of training on child protection in emergencies to train government officials, NGO, UN staff. We have targeted not only child protection practitioners, but also government staff from different sectors such as education, health, justice, civil protection, police, marines, etc. As training participants have recently responded to the emergency, one of the objectives of the trainings was to help them identify strengths and weaknesses of their action regarding child protection, and furthermore, develop action plans to improve their performance and preparedness in line with the CPMS. In general, different stakeholders appreciated the uniqueness of the space that was provided during the trainings. The training allowed participants from different areas of expertise to know each other and know their roles in emergency, and then to exchange opposite opinion and discuss about child protection and gender-based violence issues openly, something they did not have the opportunity to do since the emergency started. The training have opened a new window of opportunity, in this case for UNICEF, to work further with different stakeholders responsible for preparedness and response to disaster and emergencies. During the trainings, the option of contextualizing the CPMS was mentioned. In the case of Ecuador, the National Secretary of Risk Management requested UNICEF to strengthen the capacity of their field staff on CPM, child protection emergency and CPMS, and technical support them to carry out the contextualization process. A technical group started working on the contextualization by selecting the most relevant standard to be adapted and contextualized, and the contextualization process is still going on. In Mexico, recently, we have started a series of also training workshops. Here, the civil protection structure and resources are very solid. So the training on CPMS have been useful for non-child protection practitioners to identify the particular protection need of children and adolescents in emergencies, and to be aware about their role and what they can do to better protect children in future emergencies. In the last training I have facilitated 2 weeks ago in Chiapas, at the end of the training, one staff of civil protection in charge of coordination of temporary camps and information management came to me and told me, I was quiet during training, but all along I was thinking, what can I do better next time to better protect children? I promised to myself, next time I will have different in mind. I will have children, in mind when setting new camps and collecting information. I simply will do differently. I personally believe that CPMs and training packages are very useful for advocacy, for programming, capacity building, and so on. And I'm very glad that we're working on a new version, and I'm looking forward for it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Very good. So we are now going to turn to Jessica Serrano. We're still working on the connection to EFE. So Jessica, we'll turn to you next. Jessica Serrano will be focusing on how her organization is planning to engage in the consultations working in Colombia. Jessica holds an MA in International Peace Studies, is currently working with CID in Colombia as the Spanish help desk for the child protection area of responsibility. Jessica, I hope that we have you on the line. If so, you have the floor. Over to you, Jessica.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Okay, hi. So, good morning, everyone. I was invited today to share the experience of Colombia in the CPMs consultations. So, the consultations are going to be led by CID, which is a Colombian NGO that works with vulnerable communities, victims of the conflict, child protection, and education. However, we understand the importance of promoting coordination among the different actors. Therefore, CID created an alliance with UNICEF and ACNUR, or UNHCR, sorry, in English, through the protection cluster, which is the body in charge of child protection in the country. So we will be having the direct support of the child protection cluster, the protection cluster and UNICEF. However, we are also looking for the participation of different child protection actors during the consultations, such national NGOs, international NGOs, UN agencies, and representatives of both local and national governments. Now, how are we going to do the consultations? We divided the whole process in mainly 3 stages. During the first stage, we will invite actors from national and local level to choose the standards they consider the most important according to their context. This survey was done through internet. At the end of the whole process, we choose 5 standards which are going to be evaluated during the consultation. Then the second stage, as you can see, consists on different webinars to share the information of the selected standards. In this stage, basically, we understand that not all the actors know perfectly all the standards, so here we want to transfer the information before doing the consultation so that we have like a more relevant outcome of the evaluation. And after all this, we will start with the consultations, which will happen in the national, local, or field level. In the field, we will do 3 one-day consultations in 3 different departments, which historically have presented more critical situations in terms of armed conflict and natural disasters, which are Chocó, Putumayo, and Nariño. It's also important here to mention that these departments have a huge percentage of Afro communities and indigenous communities, which will allow us to have a more inclusive consultation. And by last, the national consultation will take place in the capital city, Bogota, which is where all the headquarters of international NGOs, UN agencies, and the big NGOs are. Here we will have 2-day consultations with, which not only will have the participation of these actors, but we will also invite 2 representatives per department to have a more complete and inclusive consultation. This will be all. In case you have any questions, I am open to listen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And again, I do hope that we'll have a bit of time for questions. Otherwise, we'll certainly follow up with you afterwards. So I'm sure that there will be some coming in regarding your experience. It seems that we have not been able to reconnect to Efe Listowell in Nigeria. So we're going to move on instead to our final presentation, which will be from Susan Wisniewski, Child Protection Advisor at Terre des Hommes and co-chair of the CPMS Working Group. Let's see, Susan is actually currently based in Myanmar and has 15 years of experience in humanitarian response, having worked on child protection and education programs in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, Cote d'Ivoire, Chad, and Uganda. Susan, thanks so much for being with us, and you have the floor. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. I'm going to give an overview of the revision of the CPMS into the second edition, and specifically looking at why are we revising and what are some of the revisions that are being made. So why revise the CPMS? First, simply is that the current edition is from 2012. So in the last 6 years, there's been a lot of learning within the sector. Additional guidance has been developed and studies made, and more practice on certain issues. So the first main reason is to really ensure that that learning and the latest evidence and best practice is included and reflected in the CPMS. The second reason is to make sure that we're better reflecting today's humanitarian context. So the first edition was also applicable to all humanitarian action, but it was developed under the Global Child Protection Working Group, which was within the cluster section. And we've evolved into the Alliance for Child Protection in Humanitarian Action, which includes the cluster context, but also all humanitarian context, including in preparedness. So we want to make sure that the CPMS does a better job of being applicable in all of those contexts. So specifically, we'll look at refugee context, migrant humanitarian crisis, as well as settings of infectious disease outbreak, and make sure that all of those are being reflected in the CPMS. And then third, we really want to make sure that the CPMS is speaking to a wider range of local and non-traditional frontline humanitarian actors. We did a survey in 2017 where people responded that the CPMS does seem to really speak to program managers and child protection program managers and child protection coordinators, but not necessarily reaching frontline workers and being clear and understandable for all levels. So we want to make sure that the gap is addressed in the next edition. And we also want to make sure that cross-cutting issues are better included. In the same survey in 2017, we asked users what they would like to see strengthened in terms of different cross-cutting issues. And you'll see the whole list of issues. For example, having better consideration of age within the CPMS. So within the subgroup of children, looking as well at what are specific considerations for adolescence, as well as for early childhood. Other cross-cutting issues we're looking at are gender, issues of disability, making sure that we strengthen prevention and preparedness, and a range of other cross-cutting issues will be strengthened. So who's leading this revision? This is the CPMS Working Group of the Alliance for Child Protection in Humanitarian Action. It's a group of 38 organizations, which include UN agencies, international NGOs, national NGOs, networks, and one academic institution, all working together to lead the revision. And then, of course, there's a much wider range of agencies actually participating and contributing to the revision. Okay, so moving to what are some of the changes that you'll see in the second edition. The first major change that I think Minya alluded to as well earlier is in the pillar on standards to develop adequate child protection strategies. So this pillar is going to be restructured around the socio-ecological model, which is widely used within the child protection sector. So we're going to keep the standard that currently exists, Standard 15 on case management, and that's the standard that really cuts through all of the levels of the ecological model, so from the individual child to family, community, and society. And then we'll have a new standard on family strengthening and family level approaches. We'll have the current standard will remain on community level approaches. And then we'll have a second new standard, which is on safer societies, that will be added as well. Some other changes that will happen in the structure is that the fourth pillar, which are the standards to mainstream child protection in other sectors, that's going to expand out to look at integrated approaches and working across sectors. So still including mainstreaming, but also helping to promote and facilitate integrated programming with child protection and other sectors. And then we're going to make sure neglect is better highlighted and included in the second edition. And we're also going to make sure that the principles are updated along the lines of the 2018 SPEAR protection principles which have been revised, as well as the CHS, the core humanitarian standard. And then lastly, we're going to have some specific notes wherever it's needed on key actions or guidance that relate specifically to either refugee, IDP, or migrant context. So those are the highlights of the main changes. In the process, we're just opening now the consultation process as of yesterday, and that will be open until the end of August, around 24th of August. And we have already planned about 10 country-level consultations, so both either at national level or at subnational level, and I see some of you on the webinar also participating in those. If you go to our website, you'll see the contact persons for each of the national sites that you can be in contact if you want to participate. Or you could also send us an email, and we can also put you in touch with the relevant contacts. And if you want to organize a consultation, please also be in touch. These are interagency consultations that look at a few of the standards that are priority for that context, and make sure that the revised draft is really speaking and appropriate for that context. And then finally, we'll have individual reviews of the draft CPMs. As I said, those were open yesterday, so brand new. And you can download them online, and there's a feedback form that I think we'll talk about shortly. And we really want to encourage as many people as possible to review the standards. So both child protection practitioners, but also humanitarians from other sectors who can give valuable input on how they're using them in their sector, in the integrated programming standards, as well as others. And we really want to encourage everyone from the whole range of users of CPMS to participate. So from global and national, but particularly we want to encourage local level practitioners to comment on the standards and give their feedback, as well as governments. We make sure that we really have all the users inputting into the draft before it's final. And there's an online feedback tool that I think Marcus is going to talk about just after this. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. And yes, indeed, we have Marcus Forsberg, who's going to be coming in just a couple of minutes to run us through precisely how all of you can contribute to the revision process in the ways that Susan mentioned. So he'll walk through a few slides explaining how that works and sharing the needed links. Before that, we have a little bit of time, so I'd like to go to try to address just a few of the questions that have come through. I have some a question first for Susan, then for Minya, then for Riyadh. We'll see if we can get through those three. If we have time, we may do a few more. But first, just quickly over to you, Susan. We actually had a few questions come in that you started to address actually already in your presentation, but a couple specifically regarding how early childhood will be addressed in the revised CPMS. You mentioned that this will be strengthened, and I wonder if you could take just another minute or two to elaborate a little bit regarding how you foresee that the early childhood subcategory as a cross-cutting issue would be strengthened in the revision, since we had a couple of questions about that. Over to you, Susan.
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. In terms of process, we have a focal point for early childhood, and we have focal points for other cross-cutting issues that have gone through a first draft early in the year and made recommendations for each standard on content to be included and considerations of terminology and overall considerations for the groups that are revising the standard to take up. So then all of those recommendations are being included in each of the relevant standards. But I mean, it would be along the lines of making sure if there's a particular consideration you would make for younger children, for example, on Standard 10, on psychosocial distress and mental disorders, how you would work with younger children or on unaccompanied and separated children, just noting that you may need to work a bit differently to make sure that you're addressing younger children. Those are the types of considerations that will be included.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And now back to you, Minya. We had a question coming in from Lizzie in Kenya, and she was wondering, how can we include the standards in protection assessments and in the subsequent strategic and programming recommendations for humanitarian actors? Is there any particular good practice or examples that you might be able to share with us, Minya, regarding how we can include the standards in protection assessments and the subsequent strategic and programming recommendations? Over to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Okay, because now I'm speaking through my computer. I actually answered a bit in written in case you couldn't hear me. But in general, when it comes to working with other sectors and mainstreaming and now going into integrated approaches, I would say the key is always a great collaboration. And I would say many of the obstacles we have will be solved through that, but of course the obstacle in itself is to get on the same table and in the same room to talk to other sectors. I think this is also a little bit with experience of my own organization. One of the other obstacles we have is also that all our structures and guidelines and reporting formats and analytical tools are all based on sectors. So they're all divided by sectors. So there is some groundwork to do to ensure that they can also capture more integrated approaches. And I think that's probably something that all organizations have to look into a little bit if there are sort of organizational challenges with, for instance, if you do something together as a sector and education and child protection work together in ensuring protection in school, which sector reports those, the progress? So things like that will need to be solved a little bit in each organization probably, or as a coordination mechanism. But I think in general, if the whole idea with integrated approaches is to actually sit together, try to assess situations, to analyze the situations, to strategize together, and then sort of see which sector should do what, but then all being part of the same picture, and then do this joint analysis as well. And I think that the reporting can follow by that, but it is difficult because we're not really set up for that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Very helpful. We do still have a bit more time. So Riyadh, if I could come to you, I have a couple of questions that have come in. First from Heliana, who is currently based in Iraq, and then from Liwal, who is, I believe, based in Syria. So first, question from Heliana to Riyadh. Can you please be more precise about how you managed to get the civil society in Syria to understand the importance of child protection? I've been working in Iraq, and there we had a similar situation in which people did not understand why child protection was important, or that it was important at all. Would you have anything, Riyadh, to share as far as insights with Heliana from your experience? So that's the first question. The second question is a related one, also for Riyadh, from Liwal, who is wondering, how did you or did you contextualize the standards in your work in Syria, and how did you find the capacity on the front lines to mainstream the CPMS in your work? So over to you, Riyadh. You have the floor.
All right, thank you. So both are very important questions. For the first one, it was very hard actually as it's a very new concept for the community and for the civil society itself. It was very hard to convince them that it is important to follow those standards. The thing is, or the secret is, to design your business model or your intervention around the community itself. And that's what we have done. We started with the community, with the caregivers, with children themselves. We started talking about the rights, how they should deal with them. We had a lot of capacity building for the community, and they started to ask questions. For example, a very brief one, a concept of or the role of a child safeguarding officer in schools haven't been implemented in Syria before 2011. We even did not have social services. So when we started talking, emphasizing this concept, parents started to ask other schools and education NGOs, for example, about where is your child protection or your child safeguarding officer. When they want to enroll their children in school, they ask about this role. It's purely a protection role in school. And that made other organizations, other civil society networks and NGOs started thinking about this concept and started communicating with the protection cluster, with child protection organizations, so they get help in designing this kind of structures. I would be very happy to share with you maybe our strategy and our intervention models, so we and talk more about that since we don't have that time now. Regarding the second question, of course, we did contextualize the standards a bit because when you're working in such a hard environment or context, sometimes the community think about those standards as they are against maybe religion or against traditions in the community. So you should be smart about how to deliver the idea, how to talk in a contest-friendly language or a community-friendly language, if we can say that. So yeah, you should think about how to work around words and how to start. Maybe you should not start implementing the standards immediately. You should take some steps before and then start with some standards. As I said, because in Syria or in Middle East, some standards are considered against traditions and religion sometimes, like early marriage or even physical punishment and so. I'm also very happy to share some of our experience, how we work around that, and what we've done to anyone who needs to know more about this.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated, Riyad. Now I have a couple of questions. Jessica, going over to you. The first is from Natalia in Ukraine. She is wondering, it's a similar question actually to some that were coming in for Riyad, but posing to you, Jessica. Natalia wonders, did you encounter any difficulties in engaging local and national actors or any other key actors in your work? And if so, how did you overcome those difficulties when practically working with child protection in the field? So again, a specific question about difficulties engaging local and national actors. A second question coming in for Jessica is from Mills, who is based in Madagascar. Mills is wondering, did it work for you practically to use the online standard? Did you find that the key actors had access to the internet to sufficiently access the online version of the standard? And if not, what kind of mechanisms did you use, or what kind of alternative practices did you use to ensure sufficient access? Over to you, Jessica.
Well, regarding the first question, it was not that difficult to engage local and national actors when it comes to international NGOs, local NGOs, and different organized civil society groups. However, we find that it's kind of tough to try to engage local and national governments, given that actually this weekend were the presidential elections in Colombia, so everything is a bit difficult in all levels. And when it comes to the local level, the government in the field, let's say, they're focused in different other aspects of. They focus more on displaced people, and they usually don't prioritize child protection. So it's been quite difficult. However, we are in this alliance we have with the protection cluster. We're working with the protection groups in the field, and they're trying to engage different education secretaries, the ombuds office in the region. So it's kind of working better. And the second question regarding the online survey. Well, we have in different regions, we have very good internet connection, and we're doing this in the capital cities of the department. So it worked a bit better than in other contexts. But yeah, it was kind of difficult. We had to make a lot of follow-up calls, trying to explain them how to use the online survey. But at the end, it kind of worked. We expected more participation, but what we saw is that there is a lot of international NGOs and UN agencies who participated from the local field. We did have a lot of participation from local actors on the survey. However, we are at CID, we have offices in this department, so we did a lot of calls with the different local actors.
Great. Thanks so much, Jessica. We are coming actually close to the end of our time, but hopefully no one will strongly object if we go over just by a couple of minutes. We do have a very important last couple of points on the agenda. Now I'd like to give the floor over to Marcus Forsberg, my colleague here at PHAP, the Collaboration Center Manager, to give us a bit more information on how to practically take part in the online consultation consultations. He's going to introduce the two main ways that you can contribute. And following Marcus's intervention, we're going to turn back to Susan and then to Minya for brief closing remarks. So Marcus, thanks for coming on the line. Over to you.
Thanks, Anherd. So, as Anherd mentioned, PHAP is supporting the consultations through two online tools, primarily. One issue-specific survey, and then, on the other hand, a form to submit comments, whether general or text-specific, on the draft. And I say they are online tools, but there are also offline versions for these. I'll just quickly go through how to use these, and then I hope all of you will, maybe immediately after this event, look at them. So whether or not you're going to be reading through the draft in detail or not, I encourage you all to first download the current version of the CPMS draft. You can do that from the Alliance's website, so just go there to the alliancecpha.org/CPMS-revision. You'll see a little symbol there for the draft standards to download them. So once you have those in your hand, then I would recommend everyone to take the issue-specific survey. So this survey focuses in on some of the more difficult issues that the revising groups were able to identify during the revision process. Questions that they needed more input on, or questions that they needed to consult specifically on a wider audience on specific questions. So everyone who is working on child protection in any capacity should take this survey. And even if you are participating in face-to-face consultation, or if you're submitting comments on the text as well, we still encourage you to take this survey. So right now, the English version is available, and in the coming days now, it will also be available in Arabic, Spanish, and French. The link is the same. You go there, and then you can change the language. So just keep track of this URL you see on the screen in front of you, and my colleague Sheila has posted that in the chat as well. So it's designed in a flexible way, so you can either answer all of the sections, which we of course encourage you to do if you're able to, but if only certain sections are relevant to you, you can select those and you will be presented with a shorter survey. Depending on how many sections you answer, it will take about 15 to 90 minutes. It's a quite wide span depending on how much you choose to answer. It is possible to pause and return to the survey at a later time, so there's no reason not to get started straight away with it. It importantly also does not require you to first read the standards. So I would recommend that you download the standards, but then immediately just go and start on the survey. If you don't have time to finish it, you can finish it at a later date. Finally, there is a form to submit comments. So after you, or as you go along in the standard and you find that you have comments either on the content or wording or something that you want to get through to the revision groups, then we have set up an online form that you can submit that, and it asks you to clearly specify which part of the text it refers to. You submit the form. Once submitted, it automatically reloads a new form, so you can just reuse that form over and over again. We prefer to use the online form as it saves us a lot of work on our side, but a Word form will also be available very shortly for those with a poor internet connection, or if you're collaborating with colleagues on your comments. The deadline for the survey and for comments is at the end of August. The specific deadline I will actually look up right now here. The deadline should be the 24th of August, but I think Susan is specifying that in the chat right now here, so I don't have that in front of me right now. So just repeat. First, go and access the draft using this link. Then take the survey, get started on it straight away, and you can finish it up later. And Susan just confirmed that the deadline for this survey is the 24th of August. And once you've taken the survey, then also go through the draft in detail and submit any comments. Thank you, and over to you and Herd again.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Marcus. Yes, the deadline is the 24th of August, but as Marcus mentioned, you can get started right away because you can pause and return later. So our hope and our recommendation is that everyone download the current draft via the link shared by Sheila. You'll also get that in the follow-up email, and then start the issue survey just as soon as you can because you can go back to it later if you don't finish all in one sitting. So now, with apologies again for being slightly over time, I'd like to turn now first to Susan and then to Minja for any brief closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you very much. I just want to share our thanks for taking the time to be on this webinar today, and encourage you all to provide your feedback into the draft second edition of the standards. We really do appreciate any comments that we get back and feedback, and all of those comments will be compiled and reviewed by the revision groups for each standard, and then integrated into the next and then eventually the final draft of the standards, which should be available in the 4 languages by mid-2019. So that's English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan. A pleasure having you on the line today. And now over to Minja. You have the floor.
Thank you. Not much to add after Susan, except to say that also what we are really excited about this time for this revision, and which we hope will be stronger than last time, is that while we had a great number of practitioners and actors and organizations taking part in the original development of the standards, we believe that we are part of a big shift where the power to and the use of the standards will be much more in the hands of national actors and national workers and national staff, as it should be. So it's also a great encouragement for all national actors to take part in this and be part of the global level development. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks to both Minja and Susan, co-chairs of the CPMS working group, for the very interesting and important work that you're doing, and a pleasure to have had you on the line for this discussion. Great thanks also to Christine Knudsen for having joined us from Sphere, and to the practitioners who shared their experiences, Patricia, Jessica, Riyadh, Efe, unfortunately we weren't able to bring on the line, but thanks so much for being in the chat. And last but not least, of course, to all of the participants who joined today and were very active, not only in the chat, but also in submitting questions. We hope that you'll all continue to stay involved.